I have 3 different browsers open with dozens of tabs each, and I'm like, huh, the performance is really bad. I don't understand. All right, okay. I just gotta clip on all my things here. I feel like a bionic man. Oh, that's a topical cultural reference right there. Oh, okay. Do re mi. All right. Okie dokie. All right. So let's start with our intro to social methods lesson for today. Okay. So last time we were talking about kind of quantitative research and some of the design aspects, some kind of key terms and things to think about. And we ended off, talking about this particular way of doing surveys, right, which is called a Likert scale. And basically, this is your scale that looks something like this, right? There's a few different forms of them, but this is a very typical form, right? So you start with a statement. I like shrimp. Well, I like shrimp. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. Cannot be a question. Just let it be known that if you put a question with a Likert scale, I will make fun of you privately with my colleagues. I will take pictures of it and send it to them so that we can mock you together. Because we have nerdy discussions about all sorts of things related to research design. You will never know, so it won't hurt your feelings. But I will make fun of you. And don't worry, there's lots of other survey design things that if you do, I will also make fun of you privately, and you'll never know. You'll get very polite feedback from my TA, but I will mock you. Like the dreaded 6-barreled question that came out about 2 years ago. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, Likert scale. I'm in a silly mood, by the way. I don't know why. In my previous class, I was extremely silly, just like off the walls levels of silliness. And sometimes I get into a silly mood. I don't know why. It's probably because it's like Monday. When I was driving to work, the sun was actually up instead of being pitch black the entire time. So like maybe the sunlight has entered my soul somehow. I don't know. Okay, so statement. That should be statement. Good job. So Likert scales is a statement usually with a set scale. Again, the reason you would tend to want to use something like this is it makes doing the survey for your participants really, really easy, because every time they hit a question, they already know what the set of options are, so you can easily go. I think I was looking at one yesterday. We're using a scale. It was like never, sometimes, often, always. Which again, similar kind of thing. There's a behavioral survey, but similar kind of thing, right? You could do the entire survey really quickly and easily because you knew what all of the options are, right? So it's meant to, so that you could read the statement, right, and move through that statement, know what the answer sets are really, really quickly and easily. All right, that's our Likert scales. Okay. So coding, we'll kind of come back to coding a few different times in the course. It's a little different when we talk about quantitative and qualitative methods. It's an important part of everything because it's the way that you make the data understandable. Generally speaking, in quantitative data, the only time you're going to see this is typically on, say, like a survey where you have an open question, right? So if you call, right, we had our 2 categories of questions that you can ask, kind of close-ended questions and open-ended questions. So close-ended questions is just like this, right, where you have a set of responses that the person can choose from, and there's no way to deviate. An open one would be usually what it looks like, say, in an online survey is a box where you can type, right? So it's like, please tell us anything else you want us to know about your customer service experience today, right? And you can type in a whole bunch of things. Now in those, because when you're doing kind of quant research, sorry, I keep going back and forth. It's probably disorienting. I'm really sorry. Okay, I'm just going to erase here. When you're doing this kind of quantitative research, you have what's part of the software you're going to use to analyze it, right? And that you use to set it up when you were putting in your survey into software, typically now. Please God, use software. Don't do paper surveys. It'll take you forever. Yeah, use Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey, even for God's sakes, is better than nothing. It's actually pretty sophisticated when you start digging into it, and especially if you pay for the pro version of SurveyMonkey, you can do a lot of cool stuff. Okay, why am I diverting myself? I don't know. Each of these basically has some kind of numeric code, right? So this will be like question 1, and these will all have a code, right? A numeric code that allows you to process them and put them into formulas. When you get to, so all of this is part of what calls, it's all part of what's called the code book. When you get to open questions, you have to code that data a little bit differently because there's sort of endless possibilities for what people could say. I guess, okay, so probably where this comes up the most, I know that on like digital surveys, people don't tend to type a lot into the boxes because it's sort of obnoxious. If you ever do phone interviews, people will talk, and you ask an open question, people will talk. What ends up happening there is you have to transcribe. So you have to write down essentially what that person said. And then basically you have to break each of those statements that people give you into sets of like, well, we're going to say codes, but labels or titles given to themes or categories, right? So, you know, I don't know, let's just say someone was doing public opinion research and they wanted, you know, could you tell us in your own words your opinion of Mark Carney, right? And, you know, well, the average Canadian is probably like, who dat? But, you know, let's say it's someone has an opinion, you know, they tell them, oh, I think Mark Carney is really qualified, right? A ton of experience, you know, very handsome, all this sort of stuff that people might say. You write that down, and then you split each of those things into kind of categories based on the theme. So if it's like competence, this has many jobs, good looking, right? Each of those is a numerical code, and you sort of sort those statements into those categories. Okay, it's important so that you can then work with that data, and you could say like, okay, 80% of our participants in, you know, open categories said Carney was competent, right? The word competent came up 80% of the time. Or something like that. I know there's some dispute about his competence, so I'm just making stuff up. Okay. Now, importantly, when you're coding, and when we get to qualitative coding, this is important as well. Those categories can't overlap, so they have to be mutually exclusive, right? So it's like you can't have two categories that kind of touch on the same thing. Otherwise, your codes get very confusing. And if you have two people, like, you know, me and Paula are both, you know, coding transcripts, we might do it differently because, you know, I'm reading, these codes are very close, they overlap a little bit, so we might put similar statements in different categories. So you want to make sure there's no overlap between statements. Sorry to use you as an example. I just know your name, so it's all good. Your categories have to be exhaustive, right? So it has to cover everything that's in your data. And if you're going through data and you find a statement that just doesn't fit, well, then you have to make up a code for it. And yeah, there has to be really clear rules for how codes are applied if you have more than one researcher, right? If you're the one doing it, you can probably skip writing really detailed rules for yourself and just keep them in your head. But if, say, you're on a big project and there's 10 people coding data, well, you're going to have really clear rules, and there's going to have to be training, seminars, PowerPoint slides, all of this stuff on how you code the data, because what you're trying to avoid is intercoder discrepancies, right? You want everybody coding the data to code it the same way. Again, this is probably something that you'll have to think about maybe in your PhD or beyond if you go that direction. Chances are if you're doing like an honors thesis in sociology, you're not going to have a team of people working with you unless you get some magical research funding, in which case I would like some too, thank you. Or your parents are extraordinarily rich, in which case, same thing. You could tell them, fund this professor, he's really great. That'd be great. Okay, preferably with as little oversight as possible. That'd be most excellent. Okay, so, all right, we're going to talk a little bit about validity in quantitative research findings, because there's a few and when you're conceptualizing your research design and what you're measuring, right, you want to think about this. So I'll go through a few. The one we're going to be principally kind of worried about in this course is just this one. These are also important, but they're a little bit more abstract. So I want you to just think mostly on your mini labs and your major lab about face validity. And I'll define all of these in a sec. So yeah, measurement validity is really just concerned with whether you're measuring what you want to measure, right? Whether the tool that you've designed, right, or the techniques that you're using are at the end of the day going to get you the data that you want. And sometimes it happens that we design particular research tools or research designs that get us a bunch of interesting information, but maybe you designed it in a way that doesn't actually get you the data that you wanted. I know I've used it as an example before, but I think of GPA as a problem here, right? When people want to talk about, really they want to talk about academic performance, and they go with GPA. GPA might not be measuring academic performance, it might be measuring something else, right? So you have to think of, are you measuring the right thing, right? Or are you somehow, or even like with, I'm trying to think of another concept. Anyway, let's go through them and maybe it'll make more sense. So there are, various kinds of validity. Okay, face validity is the easy one. Basically it's established if at first glance the measure appears to be valid. So if you can make a case, like face validity is really easy. All you have to do is make a case that your research design and whatever tool you're using is going to measure what you want it to measure, right? Does that make sense, right? Just on the surface, right? At the basic level of your design, why do you think your research design is going to get you information about, the link between social media use and depression, right? Because you're going to ask people about how much phone time they use, and you're going to give them a scale to test their level of sadness, right? Or whatever it happens to be. So face validity is just like, hey, I'm using, a well-recognized tool, and I'm asking them about their self-reported social media use. That should get us information about how much social media they use versus, their kind of mental state. So on its face, right? So think about it just on the surface. Does it tell you what you want, what you think you want it? Does it tell you, do you think, sorry, let me just back up half a step. My brain is caught in a rut at the moment. In just looking at the design on a basic level, should it on the surface give you what you think you're looking for? That's all you need with face validity, right? At a glance, at first glance, does this make sense? Okay, does that make sense? I know I kind of turfed that thing. Explaining validity, especially some of these other ones, always trips me up a little bit because I'm like, wait, which one was which again? Okay. Concurrent validity. This is a tougher one for me, and I feel like I always botch this one a little bit. So, established if the measure correlates with some criterion thought to be relevant to the concept. Okay, so let's say, like I've got my example here, student evaluations of teachers that correlates with professional assessments. But here, let me put it a different way. So we got our spots, right, as a way of evaluating professors and how well they teach. I think you could make a case that you would have concurrent validity if using a similar tool like Rate My Prof, which to be honest is a little blunt, but whatever, we'll go with it. If you're kind of getting similar or a correlation between these two measures, right? So if, say, someone's Rate My Prof and their spots are bad, there's a good chance that you have concurrent validity, right? That these two things are measuring the same thing and telling you the same thing. So you have, they're both valid, right? They're both validly checking teacher performance for professors, right? If you had, say, like the student evaluations and someone came in and did a professional evaluation of someone's teaching, and they kind of come up with similar things, right? So I don't know, the person doing the professional evaluation using, say, the same kind of questions that you see on the spot, had similar findings, you would say that, basically you have concurrent validity, because essentially they're finding the same thing. There's a correlation between both of them, right? So concurrent validity shows you the extent of the agreement between two measures or assessments taken at the same time, which is kind of why I say spot and Rate My Professor, because people tend to rate their professors and do the spots kind of at the end of the semester. Right? They're taken at the same time, and they're two measures or assessments, and so if they're comparable, right, you can say that they're both measuring the same thing. Now, if your spot was like way high, right, oh wow, amazing professor, super good, and they have like a 1.2 on Rate My Prof and they have more than 3 reviews, right, then you'd say like, okay, one of these measures is measuring something incorrectly. Maybe Rate My Professor is actually just rating vibes, right? It's just like teacher vibes, how well they get along with students, how nice they are. And this professor's really rude, but they speak really clearly and their assignment structures are great and all of that stuff, right? So does that make sense? Have I explained that in such a way? Have I over-explained it and you're ready for me to move on? No, don't answer that. Okay. Construct validity. So this is like, you can think of this almost as internal validity. So basically, if the concepts relate to each other in a way that's consistent with the researcher's theory. So within the researcher's theory, does the way they're measuring things make sense, right? So if I wanted to measure religiosity and my operationalization of religiosity is to ask questions about belief, behavior, and belonging, because my theory is that higher levels of these 3 things will lead to higher, people to be more religious and have a stronger religious identity. All of that kind of makes sense within my theory, so it all works. Where this becomes an issue is if someone's like massively misconceptualizing something, right? They've got their theory, but the tools and the questions that they're asking are cuckoo banana birds, right? It's like, I want to know about people's religiosity, so I'm asking them what they do on Sunday mornings, right? Or what kind of breakfast they had yesterday. That wouldn't be internally coherent with the theory that I'm coming up with, because my theory has nothing to do with whether you like, Lucky Charms, which are gross, or Trick cereal, which is also gross. I don't know if it's the same at your house. At my house, everyone picks the marshmallows out of the Lucky Charms, leaving only the disgusting wheat thins that are slightly sugared for me to eat, even though I really wanted pots of gold and rainbows. So they're gross. Anyway, right, measuring breakfast cereal preference wouldn't tell you anything about religiosity. Now, obviously, that's a really silly example. Sometimes people are slightly misconceiving how they want to do their measurements, which would mean like even internally their theory doesn't work. Okay. So convergent validity. Basically, it happens if, if a measure of a concept correlates with a second measure of the concept that uses a different measurement technique. So let's say, again, we go back to like professor performance, right? And we had our spot. And then we did, say, I don't know, interviews with students of particular professors, in a world where we have endless time to interview students and resources. And they came up the same, right? So you're getting these kind of quantity results in numbers, and your interviews kind of are showing similar things, right? Once you transcribe them and quantify the results, they're showing that either the professor is, bad, middling, or good, right? So these would be different measurement techniques, but they're convergent, right? So they're going towards the same thing. Okay. Does that make sense? All that makes sense? Okay. Now here's kind of the tricky thing. So this one's easy. A measurement that's not reliable will not be valid. This is your target here. If your results are all over the place, right, there's something wrong with the tool you're using. So if let's say you're trying to measure professor performance, and for Professor X, right, asking the same questions, and you get like absolute wide divergence, right? It's totally all over the board. Run? That's a weird sound. I don't know. A cart? It's a really loud cart. It's like slightly concerning. And the building collapsed and killed them all. Okay. What was I saying? Okay, right. If you're getting like results that are all over the place, right? There's no consistency. You just have like results that are all over the place. What you probably have is that your measurement is not reliable. You're not, there's an inconsistency in the way your data is gathered, or your tool is like the questions are worded in such a way that people don't understand what you're asking. So the results are really inconsistent, right? So in that case, you're not going to have measurement validity because your answers are all over the place and the answers are not reliable. Okay, now the trick is sometimes a measure may be invalid but still reliable. And this is where maybe you're asking about a concept incorrectly, right? So you're asking, let's say we're back to my silly religiosity versus breakfast cereals. You're wanting to figure out people's religiosity, and you've got questions all about breakfast cereals. Those could be very reliable, right? Everybody's going to tell you that Lucky Charms are terrible, or Bran Flakes are bad, Frosted Flakes are great, whatever it happens to be. I don't know anything about cereal, to be honest. And so you get really reliable results, right? They're consistent. People are answering in ways that make sense. Everything kind of works. So the tool makes sense to whoever's taking it, and you're collecting that data in a manner that makes sense, right? It works, but you're not measuring what you wanted to measure at the end of the day, right? You're measuring breakfast cereal preference instead of religiosity. So it would be reliable, right? And you can see all these things are clustered, but they're missing the actual target, right? So that would be the problem, right? Data gathered for the project might be invalid because it doesn't fit with the particular project, right? You end up asking about the wrong things. But because it was gathered properly, it might be useful information, might be useful to inform a small facet of the research or some other research that you want to do, right? So there might still be usefulness to it. It's just not useful for answering the question you're hoping to ask. So what you're aiming for is, of course, this, right? Reliable and valid, where you're getting, you're measuring the right thing and you're getting there with the right tools or method so you get reliable results. Okay, does that all make sense? Okay. I just have to check one thing. All right, it still looks okay. Sometimes it rescales the live stream for reasons I still don't understand. Okay, so the main goals of quant research, and we're almost done with this, and then we'll move to survey research, which I have to say I find really fun. So we'll hopefully have some fun with it. Before I do that, hang on, I'll finish this and then we'll talk a little bit. All right, so measurement. The goals of quantitative research, right, is basically to measure things, measure social phenomenon, and put it into numbers, put it into some kind of way that you can generally do statistical analysis on it, right? So you want to quantify turn into numbers social phenomena concepts and their interrelations. The other one that people want to do is establish causality, or at least correlation, right? You want to know what causes a social phenomenon. Now this, again, can be really difficult because the direction of causality can be really hard to ascertain just from quantitative data. It's not always clear which, if you're looking at stuff on a survey or existing data sets, it can be really hard to know what caused what, right? Was it the childhood trauma that caused the breakfast preference, right? I don't know, silly correlation. Or was it the breakfast preference that caused the childhood trauma, right? Which one is it? You went to get those Lucky Charms, but you found that your brother had eaten all of the marshmallows. A deep trauma occurred, right? Causality is really difficult to establish, or correlation, which direction it is. So often, right, we kind of make theories that best fit the data as we know it, but that at least is the goal of quantitative research. Okay. The other big goal of quantitative research is generalizing. So, right, you've got your sample that you're using, and if you use proper sampling methods, you want to be able to generalize to the population, right? That's the goal of quantitative research, is to generalize from sample to population. Because you want to be able to say something, broader than just in the people that you happen to sample, which is always going to be a subsection of your total population. Okay. The goal, in a lot of cases is to come up with law-like findings, right? Something that you can kind of generalize and say, if this, then that, kind of socially, that apply to a large number of people. Generalization. Particular concern to those using cross-sectional, especially longitudinal designs. We really, really want to be able to generalize. So you want to do if you're doing public opinion polling, marketing research, right, or sociological research, you want to be able to generalize this to a population so that you can, make claims, make decisions about how you're going to implement things, right? Even say with government studies, you probably want to be able to generalize it out so you can design policy on it. So quantitative research wants to have that generalizability. The experimental model is more concerned with internal than external validity, and we can stop talking about it. Now, for generalization, you do need a representative sample. We're going to talk about this in a separate unit, all on probability sampling. I know, it sounds thrilling. You can't wait. You're like, please, can we skip to probability sampling now? I don't know if I can stand the wait, but you're going to have to, because first we're going to do survey research before you find out whether you're interested in simple random sampling or stratified sampling or multi-cluster sampling. I know, it sounds thrilling, but we will get there, I promise. It'll be like Christmas morning. Okay, so your representative sample, I'm sorry, I'm being silly. I can't help it. Representative sample, right? Basically, a representative sample is representative, if it kind of matches the dynamics of the population that you're studying pretty closely, right? So it has to be kind of similar to that population. And basically, it's representative only of the sample it was taken from, right? So, whatever from the population it was taken from. So whatever population you're doing, whether it's U of A students, gamers, Canadians, Albertans, Potsylvanians, whatever you happen to be studying. Sorry, Potsylvania is the imaginary country that the enemies of Rocky and Bullwinkle come from, and I don't know why, but I find the name itself to be hilarious. It's not a real country, if you're wondering. Only, Boris and Natasha, who are after moose and squirrel, come from Potsylvania. So, but whatever your representative sample is, it's representative only of that population. Okay, and we have to use some kind of probability sampling, which I will say in quantitative research is getting increasingly difficult. For a second there, in my peripheral vision, that bottle sitting on the ledge looked like a hand up, and I thought you had like a question. And it's fine. It's just like flesh colored, and I was like, oh my god, an actual real person question? Well, the wonders never cease. And then I felt disappointed. No. Okay, random sample. So probability sampling is some kind of random sample drawn from a given population. It doesn't guarantee representativeness, right? Because sometimes random sampling goes awry, but it improves its chances greatly. Okay. Replication at least should be a goal, although increasingly, a lot of sociological studies are just never replicated, so it is a kind of problem. Okay, so replication, what's its goal? Obviously, other people can check your work for bias and routine errors, problems in survey construction. I'll give you the example. So, if the findings are not the same as those of the original study, the comparison provides reason to reevaluate the methods. Have you ever heard of the marshmallow study, right? This basic psychological experiment where basically they have, I don't know why I asked if you'd heard about it because I'm going to tell you about it now. This is this psychological experiment where they were trying to judge, where the self-control of children, whether they had self-control or not, how it would kind of play out over different spans of their life. So they brought them into a room and they had a marshmallow on the table, and they said, if you can wait 5 minutes to eat this marshmallow, you'll get 2 marshmallows. But if you eat it now, you only get the 1 marshmallow. And then they left, and there's nothing else to do in the room, just this marshmallow for a child to stare at for 5 minutes to see if they can wait 5 minutes to eat another marshmallow. And basically the original study found that, the kids that had more self-control as children had better life outcomes later on, right? That kind of self-control had good results later. Now, when people went back and redid it, they actually controlled for things like race, socioeconomic class, and a few other factors. And they actually found that, one of the problems with the original marshmallow study was essentially that all of the kids, that they hadn't controlled for any of these factors. So they didn't control for differences in like parental education, socioeconomic status, and all of that stuff. And when you factored those things in, actually the marshmallow results didn't tell you as much as you previously thought. A lot of the life outcomes were more related to how rich your parents were, rather than, and how good of a school you went to and all of that stuff, rather than your ability to not eat a marshmallow. But that's what a replication study is supposed to do, right? They were like, man, we did the same experiment and we got completely different results. What is going on? And then you go back and you dig into the data from that original study and you're like, oh, all the kids in the original study were like white and middle class. So actually it looks like something, but when you like factor it out, even the, black poor kids with, super good self-control, they got like 10 marshmallows, they didn't do better in life because they had less relative advantage. So, move you, I keep hitting you. So redoing the experiment yielded very different results, and that's what a replication study is supposed to do. But if the findings are the same, you can say the original was well done. So, good times. All right. Critiques of quantitative research. I'll go through these really quickly. Okay. What time is it? Man, how the time flies. 40 minutes when you're talking about measurement validity. Doesn't it just... It's like you're floating on a cloud the whole time. Okay. As long as you're awake. Okay. So quantitative research sometimes fails to distinguish people from the social institutions and the world of nature, and social institutions from the world of nature, right? Quantitative research at times doesn't get to some of the nuances of human experiences. It can paint a very blunt picture of things. Yeah, I mean, critics will say that quantitative research doesn't always take into account, how humans and their actions are fundamentally not the same as kind of natural forces. So trying to quantify them doesn't work. And therefore, you have to have different methods to study humans. But, quantitative researchers will say, I swear, if this is the Russians finally coming for us, I'll be very disappointed that it happened on a Monday. Or actually, maybe Monday is the perfect day for the end of the world. It would suck if it happened on a Friday evening. It's like, the weekend, boom. Okay. All right. So, I'm sorry. Oh. Okay. Quantitative researchers will say humans are part of nature, so you can study human behavior the same way. Okay. Even especially this is a critique of especially survey research. The measurement process sometimes produces artificiality and a false sense of precision and accuracy, right? People know they're being studied. So, one of the big critiques is that, you get social desirability bias on a lot of sociological studies, especially asking about really, really touchy things, right? People won't tell you the truth, even on completely random, completely anonymous surveys. Okay. Using research instruments like surveys can give you reliance on instruments and procedures. So this is about lab experiments. Experiments, right, don't always have external validity. And sometimes they give you a false sense of security for all the reasons listed. Geez, I'm having trouble speaking. Listed here. Okay. Just analyzing variables for correlation can ignore kind of people's everyday experiences and how they interpret them, which is, again, why we often do mixed methods to get around that, so we can get people's accounts. Explanations for findings might not address those perceptions, which, again, is why we do mixed methods. Okay, I thought I was done. Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. Okay, quantitative researchers are objectivists, right? So this is another critique. And they assume that social reality exists that is independent of the observer. And obviously that can be a little bit problematic. That objectivist framework, especially if it's being critiqued by someone who does qualitative research, is often just seen as not being correct, right? That nothing is objective, that everything is down to people's interpretations, and much of how people act is not objective, but basically kind of socially contingent. Okay, there we go. Let's talk survey research. Now I have to make sure I do this properly so that the people not here also get a chance to see what I'm doing. So give me half a sec to reset this. Ta-da. No, wrong. Also wrong. Okay, perfect. I found it. Good. Okay, so we're going to talk survey research. We'll talk a little bit about survey design and how you design a good survey question, some of the foibles and problems that come with bad surveys. Okay, I was going to say something. I need to remember to say it. Tomorrow, you have a lab, right? So your lab is either at 9 a.m. or at 3:30. I will not be there this time. L'Oreal will be there, which reminds me I should send her a text message just to confirm that she remembers, just because it's her first time doing it, so I want to make sure everything goes smoothly. I should be on campus at 9, so maybe I'll pop by to introduce her as well for the 9 a.m. lab. Not stay until 3:30, I'm sorry. Afterwards, it gets so hard to get off campus, the traffic takes forever, I'm just not that committed. Okay, so the lab is tomorrow, right? And on that one, you're going to be working on your research design, and especially operationalization. So if you feel like you're a little unclear on how to operationalize your variables, right? What your variables are in your kind of proposed research study, how you might operationalize them, definitely, this is a good opportunity to, ask questions, to kind of brainstorm with your peers how you might do it. And L'Oreal's really good at this, so ask her lots and lots of questions about it, and she can help you with that so that you feel a little bit more comfortable with it. Okay, so do not forget lab tomorrow. Happy days. You can go to either. Yep. I saw a hand up.
No, I think she asked my question. That's okay.
All right. Don't do that to me. It's so exciting. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking around. All right. So, okay. One thing to kind of note. There's this word that kind of kicks around. Questionnaire. This is probably the more correct term when we're talking about survey research, is what the person's actually doing is a questionnaire. I use them kind of interchangeably. So if you see questionnaire, like in a question on the exam, a questionnaire is a survey, right? A survey is a questionnaire is a survey, and all that jazz. Okay, so we're going to talk about the design of them. And I already talked about this a few slides ago in that last slide deck. But we basically have two types of questions you can ask in a questionnaire: open questions or closed questions. Now, the bulk of your questions on a questionnaire should be closed questions. Because if you are mostly doing open questions, what you're really doing is like a structured interview, and you're probably better to shift to doing that rather than doing a survey, right? Or a questionnaire. So you can have a few open questions, especially if you want to find out maybe things that you're less sure about. But most of your questions should be closed questions. Okay, open questions, right? People can say anything they want. I will get your question in 1 second. Thank you for raising your hand. I love questions. Open questions, right? People can say anything they want. Closed questions, they have fixed alternatives to choose from. Yes, please. I would say more. I would probably say 95-5, like on the whole, right? Because open questions, that's not like, don't take that as a hard and fast rule, but I think you probably want on a survey to limit open questions because they do tend to kind of cause a lot of confusion. There are a lot of extra work and all that. Yeah, please. It's not really, yeah, so it still counts as a closed question, right? Because you're essentially asking for countries and maybe they just like they don't feel like they have an exhaustive list. And so they want to give people a chance to write in another option. It's not meant to like give an opinion. Like gender is a common one now that a lot of times has an other because of the proliferation of how people identify. So that one will tend to be kind of have that other option. That doesn't make it an open question. It's just a closed question with an other option where people can type it in. But yeah, it's still a closed question. Okay. Yeah, so, sorry, I put a lot of weird cartoons and then I read them again and I giggle. Advantages of open questions. So people can reply in ways that you might not have thought of, right? So there might be things that you don't even know are interesting that people might be able to say on an open question. So they are useful, right? I think within a limited context because they can cause quite a bit of data chaos, but they are useful. It's possible for participants to, put in unprompted knowledge, things that you didn't think of, but that they know that they might want to tell you. You can, the salience of a particular issue for respondents can be examined, or they can tell you how important something is to them in their own words. And here, it can generate fixed choice format answers or closed questions, right? And especially if you do them as part of a pilot study, right? So if you did like a pilot study, right? So you're planning on doing a survey But first, you're going to run a kind of a pilot study, essentially to find out things that you potentially don't know, right? You maybe feel like you're getting your feet wet on a topic. You're trying to get the lay of the land, so you start a pilot study, right? Open questions, people may provide you with information that you then use to turn into fixed choice or closed questions, right? They tell you something interesting, you analyze the data, you generate questions out of that. So obviously, as part of your main research study, you wouldn't be able to do that because once your tool is out for data gathering, right, that tool is sort of fixed and locked, or it should be, unless people continue changing it constantly, like the prison project where they're always editing it and it's making me slightly crazy. But that's neither here nor there. You probably shouldn't be editing your tool when it's live in the field, but that's okay. So generally, I think during a pilot study, that's more of what's going on. Okay, disadvantages. They are a giant pain. They're much more time consuming to analyze, right? Because you have to transcribe and code everything, right? So they're more time consuming. So they're time consuming in two ways, right? The analysis, but even for someone writing them or answering them, right? Doing a survey or questionnaire with a lot of open questions is going to take a lot more time for someone to complete because they could go on for like 10, 15 minutes per question, right? You never really know what they're going to say or how much information you're going to get. So it does kind of mess with some of your time scaling and figuring out how long things are going to take if you have a lot of open questions. Less convenient to compose an answer, and this will lead to a higher failure rate. Honestly, if I see a survey, I go in, and I do surveys all the time just to kind of like keep them front of mind. If I see one that has a lot of open questions, I tend to quit, right? Because I'm lazy, or I'm answering it on my phone, and typing on my phone is a pain in the butt, right? Because if I'm at my computer, I'm more likely to do it. On my phone, I'm less likely, just because it's going to take me forever to type this. I make a ton of typos on my phone. It's going to be garbled. I'm going to have to, and I'll quit surveys that have a lot of open boxes because I too have flaws. So it's less convenient to compose answers for people. And so, there's probably a higher chance of a failure rate. Even like a phone interview where they're talking it and they're saying their answers, right? People may get a little bit more frustrated with all these open questions. So keep that in mind. You might need transcribing. You probably will if it is spoken. If it's written, obviously it's transcribed for you. And face-to-face, it faces inter-interviewer variability. So the way people ask questions, the way whoever is doing the interview, if it's a spoken one, right? There can be differences in how people approach things, some of the prompts they give, if they start giving follow-ups or trying to explain things. Different interviewers may get slightly different results out of these questions. So they're less consistent a tool than your typical survey research. Okay. So, advantages with, we're in closed questions. Okay, almost 3. With our closed questions, right, there's very little intra-interviewer variability or inter-interviewer variability because it's just, say you're doing phone surveys, which is relatively rare, or in-person surveys now, relatively rare, but it's a fixed question. So there's not really a chance for, Sasha and Reg to have different ways of expressing the question. It's the same question, so there's not going to be much variability, so you can get a lot of consistency. It's easier to understand the question because the answers are provided. Sometimes the answers will give you a sort of clue as to what the question means. So if someone's having a hard time making sense of the question, and this happens, right? We'll talk about how to try to mitigate that, but it does happen. Sometimes the answers can help the person understand the question. And closed questions, they can answer them quickly, very quickly, right? I did like I said yesterday, I did like a 200 question basically questionnaire, and it took me 15 minutes. It was just like boom, 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 boom. Like you can do it really quickly. Yeah, Haley. Okay, so like, yeah, so even like, intra interviewer, right? So if I one day I don't know, in a weird mood and I ask the question differently, and then the next day I get that ask it kind of weirdly to another person, right? Maybe my understanding of the question changed. So now I start asking it in different ways with different emphasis. Or I try to start explaining it to people. That would be, and that's within me. That's intra interviewer, and then it's like you and Reg and Sasha and Paula are all doing these interviews, but you're all asking it slightly differently. That would be inter interviewer. That would happen more on open questions. With these, it's just like you read the question, right? So it's like, rate your agreement with the following statement. Social methods is the most fun class I've ever taken. Do you strongly agree? Mostly agree? Strongly agree? No, I'll talk about scales in a second. Did I answer your question, Haley?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Okay. Some of the problems in survey research. Poorly worded questions. There's lots of this, and again, this is easily avoidable by pilot studies, right? By piloting your study, testing it, having other people read it, easy ways to kind of gauge whether your survey works. Okay, so that's an easy one, right? And we'll talk about how to word questions well. One of the big problems with wording is often jargon, but we'll talk about that. Jargony questions are bad. Interviewer error in asking the question. Maybe if it's on the phone, someone misreads the question. That can happen, and then someone just answers without understanding it. So if that happens. Human beings are human beings. Again, I think this is becoming less of an issue because we're seeing way fewer surveys done in person or done on the phone because nobody answers the phone anymore if you don't know the number. So this is becoming less of an issue because everything's moved online and then there's no one asking the question. Misunderstanding on part of the interviewee, right? Sometimes people misunderstand the question. Oh yeah, sorry, please.
Sorry, I just had a question back to the error in asking a question. For example, if it was over the phone and you kind of realize as the interviewee kind of you realize the interviewee misunderstood the question, can you re-ask it in a different way?
So typically with like a survey with closed questions, it would probably be hard to ascertain, right? Because a lot of them are going to be like agreement with a statement, right? So you would read the question and they don't understand it properly and they say disagree, but they actually agree. It's going to be hard for you to know that because you're not going to get a lot of context-based information in this kind of closed survey format, right? So it's really hard to control for that because you'd be asking, are you sure that's your opinion, right? Are you sure you're sure? Like you're really not supposed to do that because you're potentially introducing an element of reactivity, right? Where you're trying to get their natural thing. And it's gonna be really hard to know, right? Like whether that's the person's authentic opinion about things, right? So I would say probably not because you're going for like the most naturalistic approach possible and you starting to question their answers is going to change things. They might start to like change their answers because it's not making you happy, right? It's weird. People are so weird. They will, it's really easy to sort of get people answering a particular way. If you ask questions a particular way, or if you started to question it, I'm sure they would start to be like, in the back of their mind, oh, what does she actually want me to say? So you probably shouldn't, even if you think they misunderstood. It just goes into the data set, and but like I said, it might end up being really hard to figure out, like because you're not getting a lot of context clues around them. Now, okay, there are exceptions to this. Like the big study that's going on in the CCR, these are all essentially either like structured interviews with survey questions that are being done by people, but there's a lot of commentary between the questions, right? A lot of the participants will answer your question and then give you a whole bunch of extra details. And in that case, the interviewer might be like, are you sure that's what you meant for this question? Because now it doesn't seem like it. But I would say that's relatively rare. And I think that's kind of an unusual study in that, particular researchers on that project are also re-interviewing the same person over and over again over a year. So it can happen. And I'm giving you way too much nuance to your very simple question. I'm sorry. But it would be pretty atypical, and it would be a very, I think, unusual survey design where that would be the case. Yeah, especially a longitudinal design, you might have more of a chance of seeing it. But anyway, did I answer your question, or should I just continue to ramble until I find my way? Okay, perfect. All right. Interviewee lapses in memory, right? People might just forget. They might, I don't know, that was supposed to be an arrow, but I don't know what it turned into. I'm going to reshape it into an arrow now. There we go. Much better. Interviewee lapses in memory. Sometimes people forget things, right? So they might just not remember what you were asking them about. They might misremember facts and then give you wrong answers. That can happen. Interviewer error in recording information. Again, this is only going to be like phone interviews and in-person interviews where someone is I'm asking you the questions and I'm filling out the form on an iPad or something like that. You could theoretically tap the wrong thing and put incorrect information. Again, I don't think that's super common, but it certainly happens. Mistakes, and this is an old one. This comes out of the textbook. I should really take it out. Mistakes entering data into a computer file. Sounds like a 90-year-old man wrote that. This would be if you have a paper survey, and then you take your paper survey and you're actually physically entering the results from the paper into a piece of software. Now, I say it's like an 80-year-old man, but they had originally proposed this for the research they're doing, like just taking a paper survey in and like writing things by hand and then transcribing it, until I convinced them that was cuckoo pants banana birds. Also, we'd kill an entire forest. So it's still done, and some people will insist that you, like, especially for sensitive settings, these are done in prison, that you have to take paper in. But you can make mistakes re-entering it, and especially if you can imagine having a stack of surveys this high and having to do data entry for all of them, eventually you would get so bored that you would start making mistakes just by human error. Okay, and then biases related to characteristics such as gender or race of the interviewers or interviewees, right? They might give you, you don't know who your interviewers or interviewees. So you know who your interviewers are. You don't often know who your interviewees are. They may give you answers that are way out of line based on, their own biases in terms of things. Like you might get, if you're doing a survey on climate change, you might get someone who's rabidly against climate change, and that bias might affect how they answer, and that they might not be giving you like authentic answers, but they have an ideological reason for answering the way they do. Okay, ooh, my marks are here from last term. Isn't that fun? Okay, so, bless you. Was that a cough or a sneeze? A sneeze. Okay, well I guess I'll take my bless you back then. Why do you only bless people when they sneeze? I don't know, it doesn't matter. I'll do years of research to find this out. Okay. So disadvantage of closed questions. Obviously, it takes any of the spontaneous. Oh, sorry. Haley, I'm sorry. I'm just in my groove. I'm like doing my thing. Sorry, this one and this one? Yeah, so these are both for closed questions on surveys. Yeah. Good? Okay, so some of the disadvantages, right? You lose the spontaneity. People can't answer how they want, so they kind of have to fit into the boxes that you put, like the answer sets that you put. So this can obviously take out that spontaneity, and you don't always find out things that you didn't know from closed questions. And this one's really hard. Respondents might differ in their interpretation of the wording of fixed responses, right? What does it mean to, or yeah, what does the strongly and strongly agree mean? How strongly do you have to feel about something? That might be different for me than it is for Reg, right? Which might be different than for Paula or Sasha, right? We all have, or Haley, we all have different kinds of ways of reading strongly agree. And yeah, sometimes respondents might not find a fixed response that fits them, which sometimes leads researchers to do one of my least favorite things, which is the exit clause answer, right? Like choose not to answer, or like no opinion, or something like that. Sometimes people want to give people a neutral option, or an option that doesn't. Oh, you know what my least favorite one is? It pisses me off to a huge extent. On some questions. Not sometimes don't know is fine, but there are certain questions which I genuinely find absolutely infuriating to have a don't know option on there. Because it's silly. There are certain things it's like, how old are you? Sorry, we did this we were doing the research design on this project that's being done in the CCR, and they had for age, and they had an option for don't know. And I'm like, who doesn't know how old they are? Seriously, I mean, I don't know. It didn't make sense to me. I think I lost that battle too, actually. At which point they stopped asking me questions about my opinion on survey design, I think. But I was just like, okay, this is dumb. Why would you have don't know as an option? Okay, anyway. I don't always love don't know, but we'll talk about don't know options as we go. Because sometimes I just think they're really, really dumb. Okay. So, types of questions. Do I have I have several slides on this. Okay. How's my time? 15 minutes left. Let's go a little longer, and then we'll pick this up next time. So, personal factual questions. Things about the person. And sometimes, like, a lot of these are demographic questions. Oops, that's an H. Demographic questions, right? Things you just want to know about people's personal information, right? So occupations, number of cars owned, age, are they married or not? Income, how much money do they make? Trying to think other personal factual questions, number of children, all these sorts of things, right? These are personal factual questions. And generally speaking, I'll just give you like my rule of thumb is, unless you're using them as filter questions, I almost always put these at the end of a survey. Unless the only reason you would put them at the beginning, I think, again, that's more of an opinion than a hard and fast rule. This is where survey design nerds have fights with each other. I've had arguments with friends about this. They're like, no, you must put them at the beginning. I'm like, no, they must go at the end. There was only one way to settle this dispute: pistols at dawn. Whichever one of us survives shall be correct. I think, generally speaking, I put them at the end, but some people put them at the beginning to filter, right? If you're looking for a specific group, right? So you want only, men who are 18 to 34 and live in Edmonton and have 2 children. You can put those kinds of questions at the beginning because you're going to use them to kick a bunch of people out of your survey later. So, but I tend to like to put personal factual questions at the end. Okay, factual questions about other people. You can have them, certainly, but in terms of facts about other people, they can be a bit of a bother, because it can be a limited basis of knowledge. So, I mean, if you're asking, questions about Justin Trudeau and about like his marriage and how many kids he has, they might not be the most useful questions because, people may just not know. in that case, maybe you actually do want to have a don't know as an option, because there might be a lot of people that just don't know about other people. Okay. Questions about perceptions of others are perfectly fine, and actually, really, really helpful and good, especially about public figures, right? Politicians, in particular, we get a lot of like opinion questions about them. So your perceptions of them, your opinions of them, those are all fine questions. But if you're asking like, very factual questions, there's more of a chance that people are just not going to know. Okay, and factual questions about events, entity or events, about a political demonstration or something that happened, a historical event. Again, same kind of problematic basis. They can be problematic because most people might not know anything about it or observe it systematically, so you're not sure what people will know. You can use those questions as filter questions as well. If you're trying to get, if you're wanting to know, okay, let's say you're really interested in knowing something about the trucker convoy, right? And people's opinions of the trucker convoy, you might want to ask them like factual questions about the trucker convoy so that you can filter out the people who you think have a solid basis of knowledge on which to form an opinion, and those who maybe like heard about it casually and don't know enough, right? So you can use these as filter questions as well. I love this. I don't know why. I love the fact that they drew a house. Are you childish? And they drew a house. It just makes me laugh. Okay, other kinds of questions. Attitudes, opinions, super common. Very common, often using Likert scales. I would say the bulk of like public opinion research is just attitudinal and opinion research, and this kind of thing. So super common, super useful. Like questions about attitudes, politics, like marketing is all this, right? Marketing. The number of times I've filled out surveys about my opinion about some brand, is numerous and massive. And so definitely Likert scales and all this kind of stuff. You get tons of it. Questions about beliefs, right? Belief in, the one I have here is existence of God, but political beliefs as well. Like, do you believe that, do you believe that carbon dioxide emissions are causing climate change or whatever, right? You can ask about all sorts of beliefs, anything you want. It's all fair game on surveys. Knowledge questions you can definitely ask as well to test people's knowledge. I wouldn't say for social research, like for sociology, that these are super common, but sometimes I'm trying to think if I've ever used one. I can't think of a time where I ever used one, but maybe I should look back on all my surveys. Sometimes you could ask, like, did you know, are you aware of X, right? Are you aware of this, to sort of find out, their level of understanding or awareness, test particular knowledge. This example's throwing me off a little bit because it's like, who was the first Prime Minister of Canada? I guess is like a game show kind of question, but it's like Trivial Pursuit, which is not a questionnaire. But you could test knowledge, for various reasons if you're interested in some particular area that needs to test knowledge. Okay. Okay, maybe I'm like looking at it, I'm like 311. I'm just trying to think how far we should go here, because I kind of want to keep all of these together, because these are all kind of rules for designing questions. So maybe what I'll do is I will stop here, and I think we're well ahead of where we need to be, because you're not even doing the lab for survey design for not even next week, but 2 weeks from now. So I don't want to get too far ahead. So why don't we take a pause here? We'll come back on Wednesday. We'll keep talking about it. And I have some examples we can play around with at some point. And you can tell me what's wrong with some of these questions. But don't look forward. All right. Have a good one, Paula. we'll keep going on Wednesday, 2 days from now. It'll be great. I love survey design. It's my favorite topic.